If you ever see the boy from me, tell him that I love him. Tell him that I care.
Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the Queen's Grapevine. Of course, this is your host, Wallingford Lee, in the Queen's Grapevine. And today we want to talk a little bit about race relationship again. And more importantly, a little bit about affirmative action and the importance of it and the impact of it that it has globally and overall time allotted. We feel compelled to thank Professor Tanya Hernandez to be our guest once again. We have had many calls from as far as Atlanta and the other programs that we did with her that was so well received. Her explanations were clear. Our directions of presenting the matters was very good. So we feel compelled to always have a person of her magnitude that knows how to come across well, because these are community programs and it gives our viewing audience a great deal of education of how to go about things and where to go. Professor Hernandez, welcome to our program.
Lovely to be back.
Yeah. First of all, I must congratulate you about this excellent book named Racial Subordination in Latin America. This is a book that a few people that called us talked a lot about. Some of them went out and got it already on the impact that it had when they read it and how important a book of this magnitude was. You must be congratulated for something like this.
Oh, it's wonderful to hear. We're in our second printing now with just the hardcover before the paperback comes out, and so I'm glad it's touched a lot of people and it's being useful.
Good, very good. What is your interpretation? What do you think is affirmative action in your mind?
Well, you know, what's so fascinating is that affirmative action is talked about in a derogatory manner in the United States, and it's thought of as only being race-based and embracing people who don't have requisite skills. And in truth of matter, affirmative action is a form of trying to create actual equality and being able to encompass people who have lots of talent and would otherwise be excluded because of the way in which our racial discrimination completely cuts off whole segments of society, be it by race, be it by gender, be it by their physical capacity. There's lots of ways in which, absent programs of affirmative action, that unfortunately our notions of who are good workers, who are good college applicants, would be very narrow indeed.
I happen to agree with you. What a lot of people fail to understand, that affirmative action, especially here, because you have affirmative action in different countries also, was done because of racial behavior of this nation, not giving people the opportunities for jobs. So this was forced on to certain companies and the quotas and stuff like that. But again, because of the behavior, people never got the opportunity to pass the front door when you went for an interview. Your application and your resume were never received, was thrown in the garbage. So there are those who, A, don't understand the importance of affirmative action, when it started, how it started, and why the nation was compelled to do it after a period. Now there are those who are saying that it should be abolished, that it got to a point where it doesn't make any sense to them anymore. Is that your interpretation? Does it make sense to have it around anymore?
Well, it's certainly up for reconsideration. The Supreme Court currently has a case on its docket called Fisher versus Texas that already had oral argument in October, and so could be decided at any moment in time, and as late as this coming June is when the decision is expected. And what the court is looking at is a very small and modest consideration of race in what's called the University of Texas 10% plan. At the University of Texas, you may recall, they have a program that allows the top 10% of all of the high schools in Texas to have admission automatically into some of the University of Texas schools. It varies how they get into different ones. And after that, there's a question of how do they allocate the rest of the seats. Well, the University of Texas looks at a whole host of factors. What do you have? Any prior family history of being a college graduate? You know, are you the first generation? Are you someone who has artistic ability? I mean, they look at a whole host of factors as to what ways you would be a useful contributing member of the university to diversify the university. And of that sort of list of 20 or some factors, they include race as one component to have racial diversity. And that is what has been raised to the Supreme Court for consideration, whether that even modest examination of one's racial background is a form of race discrimination itself, to even think about race being racial discrimination.
If you ever see the boy from me, tell him that I love him. Tell him that I care. If he ever needs me, tell him I'll be there.
And so it's certainly at risk right now before the United States Supreme Court.
That's very obviously very very interesting, because I think that affirmative action made a big impact, and it helped a lot of people to minorities to get exposed, to know that they had good skills, that they had ability and stuff like that. So abolishing it, or maybe it has lifted its period of time, and now it's time for a change or a challenge of it. But I know that there's a lot of group who really truly wanted no part of it, because they felt that minorities have raised all the way up the scale, and enough is enough, especially the Republicans. You mentioned affirmative action. It's like a bad cross to them. So we'll see where something like that will go, obviously.
Well, you know, what's so problematic is that those particular racialized perspectives about affirmative action completely overlook a number of things. One, the way in which we still have very strong racial discrimination occurring in the United States. Some of it is conscious, some of it is unconscious. But whether it's unconscious or conscious, it is still in existence. And there's many documented studies that show that to be the case. And what it also ignores is the way in which, absent programs of affirmative action, that you would have whole populations that would not even be examined for inclusion, despite their skills, despite their credentials. And so what we have is a desire to sort of go back to a time when the only affirmative action that exists were for white men who had an exclusive control over all forms of socioeconomic advancement and opportunity.
It's interesting that we talk about something as sensitive of affirmative action. Our research showed that the person that's getting the best out of affirmative action today is young white women, especially when we talk about construction jobs and those who are owners of a construction company, and they put in certain bids and stuff like that. So affirmative action has helped everyone. Does help minority to get jobs, and rightfully so. And the only reason they're in a job is because they're qualified. If there was no affirmative action, they would have not gotten their heels or their tiptoes into a company like that. All of those who might have lost the memory, try to remember what it was like in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. I mean, you couldn't get into a bank job. HR would not see you, you know. So I think it's very important, and maybe it might need to be tweaked a little bit, but affirmative action has made a big difference in my mind, I think.
Most definitely.
You know, let's talk a little bit. We'll talk about affirmative action or anything like that. We'll talk a little bit about affirmative action rates. Is anything like that in Brazil? Does it have any effect in Brazil at all?
Well, what's so fascinating is that while at the very same time that the United States has got this huge case before the Supreme Court looking at even the most modest use of consideration of racial background, Brazil is at the forefront of actually not only endorsing and embracing affirmative action that's race-based, but also mandating it and mandating actual numerical quotas, set-asides. This is not the case at all in the United States.
Wow.
We're up in arms as far as the public discourse is concerned with even just a consideration of someone's racial background. Brazil is actually sort of saying, we want certain numbers, percentages, quotas, actual numerical quotas, because of their concern that absent an examination of race, that they would not actually be able to have a full-fledged democracy. Right? That working within a legacy of slavery and racial exclusion for so long has left them with a society that is not racially integrated. and that they cannot be a true democracy, a global economic leader that they aspire to be, without actually including all members of their societies as full-blown citizens. And so the articulation about the justification for affirmative action as far as the Supreme Court is concerned, as far as the legislature is concerned, is really quite embracing and more broad-based than anything we've ever seen in the United States.
Interesting.
And not only is there this, there's a Supreme Court case that states that numerical quotas are legal. There's also now, within the last year, a statute, the law of social quotas, that mandates
Wow.
numerical quotas for the federal public universities.
Wow. Wow. I'm amazed. How large would you say is the black population in Brazil?
Well, the population in Brazil varies across geographic areas. Right? So in the Northeast, the numbers range from approximately 50 to 75%, depending on where you are. But a rough estimate, just from a larger perspective, is that it's at least 51%. If you're looking at it across the entire nation. The reason for the estimation, as opposed to a sense of, is that in Brazil, the question on the census for someone's demographic background is not race, it is color. And the color is a broader range, so that it includes a category called black, negro, and it also includes a category called pardo, which is a sort of mixed race. But obviously that is a very open-ended, porous sort of form of inquiry, so it lends itself to some uncertainty about sort of how people are responding to the question and whether it fully encompasses everyone who is of African descent.
Interesting. You know, I am shocked about the affirmative action and the mandated quota. Would you say that it has been very well received over there then?
Well, I mean, there's been quite a bit of public debate, and what is fascinating is that the newspapers have often reported on vocal opposition by a very small segment of the society, so these very educated, elite white members of society who have voiced their opposition
to it.
But when there have been surveys of a more broader spectrum of the entire population, what we see is something called the America's Barometer. What we see are responses that show that a greater proportion of the society is actually in favor of having some form of affirmative action and racial integration of their society.
Interesting. I know you did quite a few research when you were putting together the book on racial subordination in Latin America. How you view Brazil in terms of mixing of the race? Is it more acceptable in that side of Latin America than most Latin American countries?
I would not say that Brazil is more accepting of mixed race relationships. What Brazil shares with the rest of the region in Latin America is a rhetoric that mythologizes its greater acceptance about interracial relationships. But that rhetoric doesn't always meet up with equitable treatment for people who are in interracial relationships, particularly where they are couples that have membership at wide ends of the spectrum. So meaning a very dark-skinned man in a relationship with a white to light-skinned woman is reacted to. It is not viewed as a neutral matter. Couples who are in these interracial relationships and have been interviewed have reported the ways in which there are double takes, there are negative comments that are made.
Stare at.
The stare, the double,
look,
you know,
yeah.
Exactly. And, you know, questioning of the relationship because of the racial mixture of within the couple. So we have this dichotomy in Brazil, which actually is very much like the rest of Latin America, where there is a rhetoric, sort of a public discourse about being welcoming of interracial relationships, and then on the ground, a public reaction to interracial relationships that can be negative at times.
I'm quite sure it also has to be very difficult when we talk about interracial relationship for a person of color, whether it be a woman or a man, into a relationship, and the double take and the double look. And the criticism, and I'm sure from a family standpoint of view, it has to be extremely difficult for them sitting down and meeting the other family members of the other spouse who's white. It has to be a very difficult thing.
Well, what's interesting, you know, with all the mythology about how wonderful it is to be accepted as an interracial couple in Latin America, as opposed to, you know, the evil of the United States, is that we actually don't have as many marriages that are interracial. We have a lot of interracial intimacy. You know, sex is happening, but that's not quite the same thing as established marital relationships. In point of fact, the greater rate of marriage is between people of the same racial identity and people, even further, people of a similar phenotype. So even the same shade is what we see a lot more of in Latin America as far as marriage is concerned.
Very interesting, interesting. We'll be right back on the Grapevine.
If you ever see the boy from me, tell him that I love him. Tell him that I care. If he ever needs me, tell him I'll be there.
And we're back here in the Queen's Grapevine, of course, talking about a little bit about affirmative action, a little bit about quotas, the universities, and the behavior and thought process of certain people, the way how they look at affirmative action. We're also talking a little bit about race relationship. We touched in the first half about the affirmative action, how it's viewed in Brazil, how it's received, the quotas, and certain mandates that are on the table, and what it's going to be. We talked a little bit in the first half of the program a little bit about the importance of affirmative action here in this nation, the United States of America, why it was important to have it, how much it has accomplished, and how difficult it was to get it done. And today, affirmative action is at a, I wouldn't say at a standstill, but it's been challenged today, where there's a lot of groups, a lot of politicians who feels that it has served its purpose. Now it's time to axe it and get rid of it. So again, we present these type of programs because it gives you a view, it gives you a flavor of things that the importance of our nation, how we've grown, and whether the progress has been a big plus, if we got into to our goals, or whether we need to fix certain things, whether we need to tweak certain things. And having a conversation with an educated person that does a lot of research and look at various aspects of things, and we find it to be very important, and we are extremely thrilled, and I really mean the word thrill, to have a special guest as Professor Tanya Hernandez, who has been so kind enough to give us the opportunity to come on the Grapevine to discuss these sensitive issues with an open mind, where she has given us a thought process of things in certain surveys that she has done, or certain things that she had looked at on her side of the spectrum of these sensitive and delicate issues that affect all of us as Americans. Some of these conversations in certain homes take place constantly, but not unilaterally as a person to exchange ideas because they're so sensitive that they're taboo. But we feel that bringing something out of this magnitude is important to you, the American public. It's important to you, the youngsters of today, who are going to be the men and women of tomorrow, who are going to have to deal with these type of issues. So again, these type of programs are educational, and it's for you, for your purpose, for you to have a viewpoint and make your own opinion. We're not trying to change your mind in any way, but it's important that you know things have taken place and where you're going and how you're going to get there. Professor, I know there was an article that came out in the New York Times a couple of days ago about universities. Can you touch a little point on that?
Yes, it was in the Sunday Times. There was this article that unfortunately was regurgitating a lot of bad science It sort of astounds me the way in which sometimes the mainstream media could harp on things that have already been discredited by other scientists. But essentially what the article was focusing on is this problematic hypothesis that letting in students with affirmative action programs into elite universities, a Harvard, a Yale,
Wow.
etc.,
Wow.
that is a disservice to them, and that they would often be better off going to lower tiered school or even community college, where
Wow.
where their capacity would be better met. I am not a quantitative scientist, but I have read the work of others that I respect that shows the ways in which that particular hypothesis has actually been discredited because they use very poor scientific methodology. It also completely overlooks the ways in which over the years, not just in the United States, but in other locations that are now using affirmative action like Brazil and elsewhere, that oftentimes what you see is children, students who have had suffered with impoverished public school backgrounds, they actually supersede expectations because what they have from their experiences of hardship is a sense of resiliency. Right? These are called resiliency studies that show that these students are more intent on buckling down and really hitting the books because they know what a hardship it has been to enter into the university. And so the contrast is that they can often perform or outperform students who have not been part of affirmative action programs. We see this in Brazil now, and it has been the case in the United States as well.
Well, one of the startling things is that I have an old man that when the election was taking place and watching the behavior of the Republican Party, he kept saying to me, "It's the same soup, it's just a different bowl." Nothing has changed because the threat, these foreign students are no threat to anyone. Even Obama has said over and over, the students that come here, if they're good, especially doctors and stuff like that, give them the opportunity to stay here because they can help our nation as good doctors and stuff like that. But you have these type of things and where the innuendos of saying, why give them the opportunity? Why not put them into a community college? Which, as you mentioned, some of them have exceeded way beyond the guys that are there because, you know what? Some of these people are poor people from humble background who have just gotten a great opportunities, and you know what? They take advantage of it and put their head down on the books and really hit the books and running to finish and to get a degree and to better themselves. So, these type of articles are really somewhat troubling to a certain extent. And it just show you the good old boy network has not changed one bit. They still have that belief of the 40s or 30s as you go on. Well, it's interesting when you read something like that, where it's going to go.
Well, I mean, what I find especially problematic about it is that it relies on old stereotypes about what are the presumed capacities of people of color, and that we should have very low expectations for them and low aspirations, as opposed to being much more realistic about the ways in which oftentimes it's the opportunity alone is more of a farce than an actual explanation about the barriers that these young children encounter in their pursuits of socioeconomic advancement.
But it also goes back to show you that some people have not accepted the multicultural society that we're living to. They are in denial to a certain extent, even though that some of them have been shocked by the election of the presidency. They refuse to accept a multicultural society, and those are the sickening thing and a troublesome situation. One of the things that we read a little bit is in various magazines when we talk about Brazil today, United States look up to Brazil to see how an economic standpoint of view, they are doing very, very well. Okay, they are doing great, and I think that right now they are trying to take some ideas from there to see if it works here because of our economy. But we are more interested in type of relationship, the racial relationship that has taken place there, because we know for a fact that Brazil went through a very tough area in terms of the economic situation, and that's changed, and it's great that it has changed. But when you did your research and you went to, did you have to go to Brazil to do some of your research
Oh,
before you
certainly.
put? How long did you stay in Brazil, and how long did it take you to put the research together?
Well, actually, the book is the product of 10 years worth of research.
Wow, wow, wow! 10 years of research.
Yes, and so I've been back and forth on a number of occasions. Sort of a culmination of a lot of other articles that I'd already published, although the benefit is to be able to have this be for a broader audience than the law review context
Sure,
that I've
sure.
published in the past.
Well, Professor, we want to say, we want to take this opportunity again to once again congratulate you for the book, because putting a book like this together takes a lot of research. And my suspicions was right. I was saying it would take anywhere from 8 to 12 years, and you said 10 years. We wish you great success, and we hope and pray that you give us another opportunity down the road to come back and work with you, because we felt a good vibration, and our public who have asked for us to come back and talk to you tells us that too.
Well, thank you. It was wonderful to be here.
And again, this is Wallingford Lee saying good night for the Queen's Grapevine, and hope that this program that we talked a little bit about race relationship and affirmative action, that you have considered something important to you, and that you have gotten something out of it, because you've had the opportunity to hear from someone who understands the laws and the makeup of the situation. And again, this is Wallingford Lee saying good night. Thank you for watching.
If you ever see